539.
When I joined up, I was
Your people certainly seem
The
to
air
be
raids worried us.
certainly getting a bit
Oh, we were winning the war. I
chaos.
used to go and
I
hide
saw
back
some
the
things
trees.
that I
Nothing
can't
Nothing was
unsee.
the same after that. My name's Mary Ann Day Sim. Well, it was Simpson. That was my maiden name. And I was born on the 6th of August 1922 in Kirkcaldy. My father worked in the linoleum industry because that was Kirkcaldy. It was all linoleum works, you know. And very good Christian man, my father. Every Sunday marched to church, and then from church on to Sunday school, and then back at church in the evening for the evening service. Monday night was Christian Endeavour, Wednesday night was Brownies or Guides, and Friday night was the Band of Hope. That was your week.
Yeah.
That was your week.
When you were old enough to go to school, did you enjoy school?
Yes, thoroughly enjoyed it, and I liked every subject, and I was good at school, except I wasn't very keen on sport. On a Tuesday we were marched to the Beveridge Park in Kirkcaldy for sport, and it was netball, and I was always so small I couldn't get the ball into the net and I used to go and hide behind a tree. My brother and mummy and my sister, we were all in church when the war was announced. But before, we knew the year before that there was going to be a war in 1938. And my mother, I worked in it was a department store, and it was the office I was in. And my mother took me away from there and put me into a factory. She thought if I was in there, I wouldn't be conscripted, you see. And of course I hated this job. I absolutely hated it. And of course whenever the war was declared, I volunteered just to get, it wasn't that I wanted to go and defend my country, don't get me wrong, but I knew that I just had to get away from this awful job, you know. When I joined up, I was 17, very naive. Of course, we were all naive in these days. When I went for my interview, the officer said, "Are you any good at sewing?" And I said, "Oh yes, I'm a very good sewer," because my mother had seen to that. And he said, "Oh well," he said, "we're looking for fabric workers." And that was to repair the barrage balloons that were all over the country by this time, and over the sea as well, from ships. And when I was posted to Bishopbriggs, I was told I was posted to 18 BC. And I thought, oh, that's great, that's Bomber Command. But when I got up to Bishopbriggs, I found out it was a balloon centre. The balloons that were over the inland were called Mark 5s, and the ones that were flying from ships, they were smaller, and they were M6s, M6. But the big ones were M5. And if they were brought down over the sea, when they were brought into Bishopbriggs to the centre, and they were inflated in huge hangars, and then you had to go in with your bucket and bring out all the dead fish. So you had to inflate them and go inside and stick patches on the tears, and then there was somebody outside the balloon sticking a patch on from outside, and you were inside sticking a patch on.
And did you feel like you and the other girls were making a difference?
Oh yes. Oh, we were winning the war. Oh, absolutely. The first meal I had when I went to Bishopbriggs, when I went to Bridgenorth to do my basic training, the first meal I had, it was evening. It was an evening meal, and my plate of soup, there was a caterpillar crawling up across my plate of soup, and I thought, if this is the food, I'll not have any more. And for months, all I had was the NAFI, and that was the Navy Army Air Force Institute. They came round with a van and sold rolls, buttered rolls and things like that. And I lived on that because I thought, if that's the meals, I'm not going to have any more.
So who have you got sitting next to you, Mary?
Well, this is Muriel. My mother knitted this for me when I joined up. And this is how we were dressed. Not like the WAFs are dressed nowadays. Their hats are different for a start, and they're allowed to have short skirts, which we weren't allowed to have. And she's named after one of my WAF colleagues who had been in the Fannies in the First World War. And she was an older woman, and she had orange hair, and Muriel had this orange coloured hair, dyed hair. The original Muriel, and this one had, but I don't know what's happened to her hair, but she's bald now. She's bald now.
What was the atmosphere like during the war? Were people worried? What was it like?
No, we didn't seem to. It was just a way of life. We didn't seem to. The air raids worried us quite a lot. The first night I arrived in Newcastle, we didn't seem to have raids in I was at Bishopbriggs. I don't know why, but the first night I arrived at Newcastle, there was a raid over the River Tyne, and that was rather frightening. But no, it was just a way of life. We just thought we were defending our country and we're doing our bit for the war efforts.
What were some of the good times that you remember from during the war?
Oh, they were all good times. The only time you only remember the bad times if somebody had misbehaved and you were all confined to billets and you couldn't get out. Maybe just to go to the cinema in the evening. You thought that was, time this war was ended, you know. That was when you got a bit fed up. But that didn't happen very often. And then, of course, you always had chores to do. You had your ironing maybe, and then you had to wait for your turn of the iron. But my mother gave me an electric iron, and I used to hire it out to the girls, threepence an hour. And then this money was all put in a tin. And when my special friend, Kathy and I, and when there was maybe £1 in the tin, we would take two soldiers out for a meal that had been wounded soldiers, and they didn't wear khaki, they wore a light blue uniform and a red tie, so that people would know that they'd been wounded at the front, you see, in France, and they brought home to recuperate. And a lot of them, they were just boys, they weren't men, they were just young boys, and always terrified that they would be sent back to the front. They didn't want to go back to the front. The night that war finished, we never went to bed that night, and we were out partying all night, and the officers invited us into the officers' mess. Now that was the holiest of holies. If you were non-commissioned, you were never invited into the officers' mess, but we're all invited in. And I've got a photograph there of showing me and some of my colleagues the night that the war ended. We were so fortunate with Churchill. Churchill saved this country. And we don't seem as if we've got anybody of that calibre now to get us through this mess that we're going through now. Nothing was the same after that. Nothing was the same.